we're going to review is called Hero, a wuxia 2002 movie directed by Zhang Yimou, starring Jet Li, Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung, Xiang Shihi, Donnie Yen, and Chang Dao-ming. In ancient China, a nameless assassin arrives at the capital of Qin to request an audience with its king to deliver a message saying that he has defeated his three most dangerous enemies. And so, being granted this audience, it seems that it goes to one way, but then it seems also that there's an ulterior motive for this assassin to be talking to the king himself. So, what'd you think of this movie?
Well, this is probably one of the most complex movies I've ever seen in my life. And frankly, I'm a little bit pissed off that people don't talk about this movie more. Like, what the hell? So, what we're presented with here is. I don't even know where to begin. Like, on one hand, we have what appears to be a typical sort of wuxia action film. It's obviously sort of following in the footsteps of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was released a few years before this and was a massive hit. And it does have that style of the very kind of exaggerated action and really kind of over-the-top stylistic. But the film obviously also takes a lot of its inspiration from Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, which is a film in which a crime occurs and we're presented with several different versions of that, of what happened leading up to it, what the circumstances were, and the audience is sort of left to make up their own mind. This film is somewhat in that vein where we're presented with different versions, again, of the circumstances that led up to this, of this nameless swordsman hunting down these three assassins who have been trying to assassinate the king. And at first he presents his version of the tale. Then the king says, no, none of that is true. I'm going to tell you what really happened. And then he gives his version of the tale. And then finally the assassin gives the complete and truest version of the tale. But really, the film is brilliant in the sense that it leads you in a certain direction, but then completely reverses itself. And what you're left with is a conclusion that is incredibly challenging and thought-provoking, and not really the kind of ending that you can easily quantify. Like, it's really not the kind of thing I feel you would see in a Western sort of film. And the film was even misunderstood by a lot of Western critics, some of whom accused it of promoting a certain autocratic mindset or being in favor of tyranny, because essentially, like, it's a very complicated sort of issue where it's like, we have, okay, the concept of China within this warring period where it's separated into 7 warring states, and it's just endless war and endless combat, and we're presented with this king, the king of Qin, who is undeniably a tyrant. He has done horrible things across this land, and these assassins who are getting together do have good reasons to want him dead. But the film kind of then, that's where it really throws down the gauntlet to the audience, and it poses the question, really, what is better in the long run? And it really kind of opens you up to a lot of ideas. And again, that's kind of a simplistic way of putting it, but you have these warriors who are all incredibly skilled at what they do, and they have these, they're motivated for what they want to do, but each of them has kind of different ideals or different ways of looking at the world, and again, different motivations for doing what they want to do. So it really, I was kind of shocked by the ending. I really wasn't expecting it to go the way it did.
So, it's an interesting way to put it, because the first time I watched this movie was when I was really young, so I didn't quite understand what was going on. I really liked the scenery. I loved how it was shot, the choreography, everything that's behind it. But
exactly.
Watching it now, it's kind of like, yeah, you do bring a good point with the tyranny. And essentially, the main hero, the nameless assassin, played by Jet Li, basically realizes that one of the assassins who had the opportunity to kill the king decided not to because he was able to be essentially a forward thinker and saw that the only way to really save this world or to save our world is literally to have this one evil that, like,
Yeah.
to conquer everything. Because at least,
Well,
I don't know.
again, it's like the idea of, yeah, like endless war. And even if we did assassinate this king, what would it lead to? Just more war.
Yeah.
Like, the thing that they start discussing, of course, is the concept of unification. And there's even a specific term that they use to define this. I think it's Qiangsha or something like that. It's a certain term that one of the characters uses at a certain point. And just the idea of our land unified. And yeah, like the idea of, even though this guy might be a tyrant, he might be the only one who's capable of doing it. So ultimately, do you overlook a great evil because it may ultimately lead to a brighter future? Like, that is an incredibly complex question. And again, it's not the kind of thing you would see in a lot of movies where it would just be a simplistic, let's kill the fucking bad guy and blah, blah, blah kind of thing. Like, this is a movie that really kind of philosophically and morally wants to challenge the audience, and it makes you pose a lot of questions. And again, like, on one hand, you could almost look at the film as being, I won't say unrealistic, but maybe a bit like, because obviously with the benefit of hindsight, we can look back and say, okay, this guy, he was a piece of shit, but he was good overall. He did unify China. But, from the position where the characters are there, they don't really have that foresight. This guy, he could have just gone on to continue sort of ruining the nation, and it could have just led to more war. But again, it's almost like, it almost comes down to like the idea of the individual warrior's code of honor. Like, again, I come back to all these warriors have a certain code and a certain idea. And there's the two characters in particular, the two assassins, Broken Sword and Flying Snow, who are sort of romantically entwined. And Broken Sword especially, he's kind of the more philosophical dreamer, and Flying Snow is much more vengeful and much more aggressive, and she really wants to get, like, vengeance against the king. But Broken Sword, he's more like, his whole thing is he studies calligraphy because he believes that calligraphy and swordsmanship essentially have the same roots, the same kind of basic foundation. So if he studies calligraphy, it will improve his swordsmanship. But ultimately, he ends up not just improving as a swordsman, but sort of developing, like, again, like, the film almost leads to this idea in the conclusion of what the ideal warrior should be. And it's, again, really complex ideas, not ideas that can be easily digested, but the idea that the greatest kind of warrior is a warrior who doesn't need to fight, or, like, but again, like, oh god, it's really, like, it's a real kind of mindfucker, because it's not the kind of movie that you can just look at and go, oh, well, that's simple. Like, again, because Crouching Tiger came out, and there was kind of like a spate of these kind of like wuxia kind of influence, like, movies that came out around this period. But I feel like this one really stands out because, like I said, it does have that wuxia style, but ultimately it's just using that as a vehicle to convey a much kind of grander idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Huh.
But yeah, like, aesthetically, the film is also quite beautiful. Like, stylistically, it's great. The fight scenes, I think, in some ways might be even better than Crouching Tiger, just because of the editing and some of the crazy tricks they came up with. Like, the fight at the beginning between the Nameless and Sky, the spear assassin played by Donnie Yen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's some crazy stuff with, like, the water droplets and everything. And, there's some obvious CGI in there, but it doesn't detract from the overall experience. It's really well done.
Yeah.
And there are some just beautiful uses of color in the film. Like, color is obviously a very strong presence. Each kind of segment of the film has its own kind of color going on. There are beautiful sequence, like a fight scene between two characters in just a field of falling leaves, and just wonderfully shot. Like, really, I was amazed watching it. I was like, wow, this is beautiful.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of color, the one thing, as you said, each color represents a segment. When the Nameless assassin talks to the king, the first story he gives, the color scheme is red, color of red hot passion and
Yeah.
jealousy and stuff like that. And then the next one is Blue, where the king is describing his own version, where it's almost kind of like, I don't know, it's
More thoughtful, I
more,
guess you
yeah,
could say. Yeah.
introspective, thoughtful. But then the final version is in white, and the king is all in black. Just
Yeah.
trying to display black and white visions, but Broken Sword is more the gray guy, just kind of like stuck in the middle, being able to see like the future, like you said.
Yeah. Well, in a way, I think partially it comes down to, maybe having an inkling of the future, but also just realizing that there's only so much you can do by killing. Because, again, the idea of, okay, you're a warrior and you train to fight, and ultimately, like, that's kind of your purpose, to kill and to fight, but where does that lead you? Ultimately, there has to be some kind of greater purpose. There needs to be somewhere to go from there, or else it's just endless warfare. And I think that was kind of Broken Sword's thing. He said, we kind of have to just stop here and draw a line in the sand and let whatever happens from this point. And it is like all of the characters kind of behave in unexpected manners, even the king himself. And like one of the things that's interesting about the film too is the notion of sacrifice, because this film has a very tragic sense to it. Pretty much most of our heroes die, and in some occasions in almost like petty ways. And to me, one of the questions of the film was almost like, because like I said, Broken Sword, he's the one who puts forth this idea of not assassinating the king and possibly just hoping instead for a better vision of unity. And Nameless, the Jet Li character, he eventually comes to agree with this assessment. So then you think, well, why even bother? Then don't even bother trying the assassination attempt. You could just go on living your lives. But they had to do it. Like, in a way, it occurred to me, he almost had to do this because it becomes less about killing the king, but more about teaching him a lesson. Instead of just assassinating the king, they impose their ideal on him, and in a way that's even more profound.
There's a very beautiful scene where when Nameless, Jet Li's character, kind of figures out what Broken Sword was trying to say, and he repeats it to the king, telling him about the story of like how he almost assassinated him, but that was the day that he figured out, this guy can't die, because as you said, he's the best shot they have.
Yeah.
The king literally tears up and says he's the only person who actually gets me.
Yeah, he's the only one who understood me, kind of thing. Yeah. And he allows himself to be assassinated, pretty much. He gives him the perfect opportunity. But yeah, at the end he chooses not to. And again, it's more about imparting a lesson. And I think, even though you could almost look at his sacrifice as being senseless, I feel like, no, it's something that he really needed to do. Like, again, like the film, it's historical, but obviously it's fiction, historical fiction. But the idea that the film is almost putting forward is, in order to make a in order to make a true positive change, they had to find a peaceful solution, and instead kind of force this king to look at things from a different perspective instead of just killing him. Because if you kill a man, what happens? That's kind of just the end, and then that would lead to just more war.
Yeah,
there would be another warlord that kind of replaces him, and it would continue the cycle. So I do understand the point the film is going to, but of course, when that revelation comes around, it can only lead to tragedy. There has to be sacrifice, there has to be death, because again, differing ideologies, like in times of war and times like this, nothing is simple. And I feel like that's one of the things the film expresses probably better than anything. And I'm amazed, because I've heard of this film before, I was aware of it, but I'm surprised people don't talk about it more, because it really is probably one of the most complex portraits I've ever seen of a political kind of particular political situation, but also infusing philosophy and all these different ideas into it, while still keeping it entertaining and great action scenes, beautiful cinematography. It's pretty damn great film all around. I think this is definitely Jet Li's best performance. In some way you almost overlook Jet Li because okay, he does a bunch of action movies, he's done some forgettable ones, but in this one he really shone just playing this character, and a lot of it was kind of just by being quiet and introspective. It was almost like a process of subtraction. And he's good at that, but in here he really brought it, you know.
No, yeah. Jet Li, of the movies that I've seen Jet Li in before this movie was, just typical action flicks where he's the main hero and he saves the day. But for this movie, he was more of the. It was when I was watching the scenes with him and the king, it felt like a chess game, But the chess game was actually the ideologies that they were putting forth and who was going to be checkmated in this point. And I felt like the Nameless Assassin had the king in check, but then he just folded.
Then he flipped it. Yeah, well, that's kind of one of the beautiful things of the film. Like, you think it's going to go a certain way, but then it just completely flips itself over. But even then, there's still more twists to come. Like, it almost pulls like a double twist on you. It's like, okay, then this happens, but no, that's not going to go that way either. And the scenes where he's in the throne room with the king are beautifully shot. Great, like, wide angles, like... like, the film, they actually, a lot of the sets in some ways are somewhat, like, minimal, like the way the film, we have the bulk of the film, which is set in the king's palace with him telling this story, and there are scenes at the calligraphy school and other places, but they managed to tell this story fairly economically, while still making it very stylish and very kind of beautiful to watch. It's a triumph of filmmaking in its own way.
Yeah.
And this director, Zhang Yimou, I'm surprised I haven't heard more from him or her. I'm not sure what their gender is.
No, yeah, this is a true gem, and it stands the test of time because this was 2002, practically 21 years ago. And
yeah, I know. It was like, it's kind of weird looking back. There was like this brief window where like wuxia films and more kind of Asian, Chinese influenced films became big. And again, a lot of that is due to Crouching Tiger breaking big. But now, now there's still a bit of that, but it's become, you don't see it very much anymore. And yeah, it might be high time to like return to that period. Even this film, like, it took a while to get released in America. I think the Weinstein Company had distribution rights, but they sat on it for about 2 years. Or no, it was Miramax, which was the old Weinstein Company. But anyway, Tarantino, I think, eventually was the one who pushed to have it released because he's a big fan of Chinese cinema and wuxia cinema, as we can see in Kill Bill. And I'm glad he did because, yeah, this is like one of the... Like, again, it's almost like a tough sell. I could see why some people were like, should we really release this in America? I don't know if they'll appreciate it, but... I think it's one of the better films of that period, and it's a film that deserves to be kind of revisited and remembered just because of how unconventional it is and just how sort of like almost, like it almost deflates itself, but not in a bad way. Like, it's interesting to compare this film to another film that we reviewed earlier, what was it, the fucking Gutenberg, Project Gutenberg?
Yeah.
Which is a film that also has kind of a flashback structure, but it completely falls apart at the end. Like, this film manages to hold, like, multiple flashbacks, multiple variations on a story, while still kind of delivering a very satisfying and very interesting ending. So,
yeah,
great job all around.
Yeah, it's great to follow, and honestly, this is the type of movie that you could watch probably 2-3 times just to get the entire full picture and really appreciate what has been going on. So my overall rating for this movie would be, honestly, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5.
Damn, 5 out of 5. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5 myself. But yeah, great film. Like, definitely kind of a masterpiece of its time. And yeah, like, I wish people talked about this movie more, because you hear a lot about, like, Crouching Tiger, but not nearly as much of this film. And again, it might be because it is more downbeat, it is more sad, but, definitely worth checking out. If you're a fan of these kind of films, it's worth checking out. And even if you're not really a martial arts or wuxia fan, I might still recommend it, because there are some great kind of challenging ideas in this film that are really worth experiencing and kind of thinking over for yourself.
So, anyways, this has been Film on High.
Peace.
Later.